Any
Yeah.
friend of CoSA's is a friend of
Of
CoSA.
mine.
Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to be talking about the new Spellbreaker Warrior and how CoSA uses it in World vs. World. So CoSA has two different variants of Warrior. We have a more YOLO offensive based Warrior and a more support heavy defensive style Warrior. I'm also going to be touching on tips and tricks with Warrior in World vs. World and some of the very basic concepts of Warrior, so even beginner players can get into the class. First, I want to talk about the baseline stats and armor and runes that you want to run on Warrior if you're playing with us. So CoSA runs around 31 to 3200 armor and 24 to 25,000 health. These are good stats for sustain since Warrior isn't responsible for too much damage. But the armor that we run is full Marauder with Melandra runes, and we also want to have soldier trinkets, preferably. If you can't get these trinkets or armor or anything like that, as long as you have close to these stats, you're more than fine. Like, you'll be fine. The difference between YOLO and the defensive warrior, though, is the weapon set. So the more YOLO warrior will run Greatsword Hammer, while the defensive warrior will run Sword Warhorn. The difference between these two is that Sword Warhorn will provide more utility with the blast, while it still retains some of its mobility with Savage Leap. It's not as effective as Greatsword with two different mobility options, which is Whirlwind Attack and Rush. I'll go more in depth later on with the weapons, but this is what you want to run for gear when you're running with us. Second, I want to go over the traits that we run for the two different variants of Warrior. So with the YOLO Warrior, you're going to be running Greatsword. You want Discipline, Defense, and Spellbreaker. And these are the correlating traits that you want to run. These complement the YOLO Warrior very well. I don't want to go too in depth with it so I don't confuse anybody, but this is what we run. And when you want to transfer over to a more support heavy warrior, all you have to do to change in the trait line is swap to Tactics instead of Discipline. So Tactics, and you want these traits. And you would also want a weapon swap as well, so swap from Greatsword to Sword Warhorn. Third, this is stuff that I almost forgot to mention. You have your utility skills. So you have your healing signet. This is the go-to healing skill. Defiant Stance and Natural Healing are pretty good, but I think Healing Signet takes the cake for the massive amount of passive healing that you get and the resistance. Next up is Balance Stance. It gives you pulsing stability. It's also a stun break, but this is pretty vital if you don't have a dependable guardian, or you know that you're not going to get stability, and you want to pop a bubble or get away from someone. You want to pop this. Next one is Break Enchantments. This is just another pocket boon strip. And then next up we have Featherfoot Graced. It gives you a burst of super speed and resistance. Again, the resistance is pretty significant in this meta. You don't want to die to conditions. And the super speed is good for getting away or getting to enemy blobs. It's also a stun break, which is pretty good. Then the last one, the most significant skill, is Winds of Disenchantment. This is an absolute nuke in World vs. World. It removes something like 400 boons off of 10 different players with Enchantment Collapse. So it also denies boon reapplication, and it also blocks projectiles, which is a bonus. It is an extremely large AoE. I don't know why anyone wouldn't run this skill. It is kind of broken in my opinion, but yeah, this is what we run. This is probably what everyone else runs. Oh, and another thing I almost forgot to mention is the stats that we run on our weapons, usually it's Berserker, and then on Hammer I run Frenzy for the Alacrity and Force, and then for Sword Warhorn I run Nullification on the Horn and Bloodlust on the Sword, and then when I switch to Greatsword I usually run Berserker again and Sigil of Air and Force. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Warrior Hammer skills. Warrior Hammer is probably the best weapon to use in War vs. World, especially Spellbreaker. Your Cleave, or your number 1 skill, a Hammer Swing, it is a chain auto attack, most like other moves on other classes. This is your 1, this is the number 2 chain, and then the number 3 chain on 1. It's a pretty average cleave. Then you have Fierce Blow. It applies weakness. It has pretty significant damage, and the cleave is pretty decent on it as well. Here's your number 2 skill. Your number 3 skill, this is it applies Cripple. It hits 5 targets, and it's like a cone shape. It's pretty long range for a melee attack. It's good for tagging for bags and all that stuff. So here's your number 3. You also can catch people with the cripple and stuff. Your number 4 skill, Staggering Blow. This one's a little bit more trickier to use. So let's say you're going in and there's damage here. You don't want to knock the enemy out with Staggering Blow out of the damage. You don't want to do that. So situationally you want to knock people into damage with this move. Just be very careful when you use it. Then you have number 5, which is Backbreaker. The damage is pretty significant on this one, but it's a single target hard CC. It knocks them down. It's good to catch running foes or anything like that, or just to get free Boon Strip. Here's your number 5. And then last but not least is the F1, Earthshaker. So Earthshaker is a large AoE and a leap. It CCs them or stuns them. It's part of our Boon Strip rotation. It is used for an opener and to get out of bad situations. So situationally you want to Earthshaker in, so leap in, and then full counter, and then if someone were to hit you, half of your adrenaline would be up, and you could Earthshaker back out. You just have to play around your adrenaline. And remember, when you use Earthshaker, it's going to be on cooldown, so expect an 8-second cooldown when you go in. Be very careful. Next up we have Greatsword, everyone's favorite on Warrior. Your 1 again is a chain auto. There's your 1, 2, 3. Again, pretty average cleave. Then you have your number 2. Again, everyone's favorite, 100 blades. Be very careful when you use this. This is extremely high DPS and really good when you want to cleave downies, or if they're mobbed or something, have no legs. You want to use that skill to get maximum DPS, but be extremely careful because it locks you in place. You can't move around when doing this. If you do, it will cancel the 100 blade. Next you have number 3, one of Warrior's best mobility options, as it gives you evade frames. It also goes a pretty good distance and does a pretty good amount of damage. So if you're in the enemy Zerg and you want to get out, just whirlwind straight out, and you'll evade most of the damage on the floor. Number 4, Blade Trail. This causes cripple. This is good to catch someone running, but I don't see much other than that. It goes in and comes back. It's overall not that great of a move. That's what it looks like. Then you have your number 5, which is Rush. This is another really good mobility option. It's fast, it goes a long range, but remember, this does not have any evade frame, so you'll eat every single piece of damage that's on the floor, so ground targeted AoE. So if you're in the enemy Zerg, as long as you see a clear path or somewhere around here or whatever, depending on where the AoE is, you want to rush straight out, and it covers quite a bit of ground. And then last, your F1, Arcing Slice. This is pretty significant when it comes to damage, but overall you're not going to be using it much. You want to allocate your adrenaline to Earthshaker or anything like that, and less Arc Divider. This is what it looks like. Again, it does some pretty significant damage. Again, you want to use it for Earthshaker more than Arc Divider. Next up we have Sword Warhorn. Sword Warhorn is a heavily utility and support heavy weapon set. The mobility is still pretty decent on it. Your one attack, it is also a chain, so there's your 1, 2, and 3. It applies bleeding after a certain amount of hits. As you can see, my bleeds are still ticking. It's a decent cleave. You don't want to be cleaving on this. You want another weapon to be cleaving with, but it's there. Then you have Savage Leap, which is pretty good. It covers a good amount of ground. It is a leap, of course, and here's about the distance. Preferably, you don't want to use this to go in because you're in Sword Warhorn, and more than likely you're playing the defensive style warrior. But to get in, to get out, that's the distance. Then you have Final Thrust, your number 3 skill. This does quite a bit of damage, surprisingly. If you run up to a Downy or someone that's kind of off the main Zerg, you can Final Thrust them for some pretty significant damage. Then you have your Charge, or number 4 on Warhorn. This will cleanse conditions because of our trait, and it gives you swiftness. So again, more mobility. If you have Condis on you, you can cleanse it. Then you have number 5, Call to Arms. This is the reason why we run a more defensive warrior. The easy to access 16-second cooldown blast. It also gives you vigor. It applies weakness, but you want this for the blast, and since we run powerful synergy, which is a trait, you'll blast a water field or whatever field twice, which is pretty great. So the F1 flurry, we don't really use that anymore. Back in the day, we used to leap in, flurry, and then cancel it after the first one because it would cause an immob. But we don't usually run that anymore. It's too dangerous, and the immob isn't really worth it. Alright, for this one, we're going to be going over a little bit more of the specifics on the different variants of warriors that we have. So first I'm going to be going over the defensive warrior. So as a defensive warrior, you play more traditional to the front line. Let's say that this golem represents our driver, and you want to, and this circle around it represents how close you should stick to the front line. So pretty close to the driver. Warrior can play a little bit more loose, but I recommend that you stay as close as possible. And another recommendation is that you listen to any field that is being dropped. So like a water field by the Guardians or Ellies, you want to immediately swap the Sword Warhorn and blast it with the 5 skill, as it will double blast with powerful synergy. You can also use your F1 Earthshaker on Hammer to blast the field as well. That is just another pocket blast. You might need the Earthshaker for something later down the line. But yeah, that's your primary goal. Your secondary goal is you're a pocket bubble, or Winds of Disenchantment. So let's say this group of golems right here is moving, and they commit to our driver and they land on top of us. What you want to do, and your role as a warrior, is to drop the bubble on the enemies, as many enemies as possible, so we can roll out, CC, and do damage in this bubble, because we are boon rejecting them and boon stripping them simultaneously. So that is our main plan as frontline warriors or defensive warriors. You can also do your rotation and stuff when they're in the bubble and all that, and that's mainly what you need to do. Remember, use your utilities situationally. Alright, for this one, I'm going to be covering the YOLO and more offensive warrior. So the way you play this warrior is less tethered to the front line. You can play a little bit more loose, but within reason, of course. You want to come back and get resets and buffs from the main group. So your main goal as a YOLO warrior is to wait for the driver's call on when to get an offensive bubble or an aggressive bubble. So let's say our driver's right here. He says, okay, I want you to go drop a bubble on the enemy group. You want to walk up, predict where the enemy is going, see where you can get the deepest hit, get an opener, so Earthshaker, full counter, cleave a little bit if you can, and then drop another bubble, and get out with Earthshaker or whatever other mobility skills you have to get back to our driver for a reset. And hopefully our main group will get CC and a bomb on that bubble to where we can have a more aggressive tempo when opening the fight. Alright, one last thing. Your utilities as warrior and how you use them situationally. So before you pop the bubble, and this is pretty important for frontline and YOLO warriors, right before you pop the bubble, you should always dedicate your balance stance to popping the bubble so it doesn't get interrupted. So when you go in as a warrior, or when you're with the group and they come at us, pop balance stance, and when the bubble is called, call it, drop it down, and then use whatever you can to get out. You can also, when you're in there, if you don't have the pulsing stab anymore, you can pop full counter to see if anyone hits you, and when they hit you, you get one stack of stab for 2 seconds, which is pretty good. Then you have 2 sources of resistance, which would be used to stop any conditions from killing you. So I recommend that when you're pushing in as well. So push in, get stability on, pop your bubble, and then go out with super speed and resistance on Featherfoot Grace, and then use your healing sig as a pocket resistance just in case you need that extra bit to get out. But and the last utility, break enchantments, I recommend that for whenever we have like stragglers around here that have boons and we think we can kill them. You want to run up to them, break enchantments, strip them, and then we can kill them more easily. We can get pulls and CCs off of them if we can strip their stab. You can Earthshaker on them and all that stuff. So yeah. In this closing segment, I want to remind all the warriors to call out your bubbles beforehand to ready the group for CCs and all that. Make effective call-outs. Call whatever you need. If you need water, you need health, you need a res. When you go down, anything, make a sufficient call-out so we know. Second, don't feel pressured. Like you feel pressured to play a certain style. If you want to play YOLO warrior or defensive warrior, tell us ahead of time so we know what you're running beforehand. Not only that, but if you have any build ideas or suggestions, theories, anything like that, discuss it with us. We'll give you an ear, and that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching the video, guys, and keep on memeing. My name is Jeff.